These two men were out for a walk when they came across something that stopped them in their tracks, a dog lying all alone in the middle of a snow-covered field. At first, they thought it might just need help, but as they got closer, both of them froze and let out a shocked gasp. What they saw wasn't at all what they expected. It was freezing, and Alexei and Ivan were just about ready to head home. The two roommates had gone out to get some fresh air at the park, but it turned out they were pretty much the only ones crazy enough to be out in that kind of cold. Their faces were numb, and their hands were already stinging from the chill. As they started walking back, a soft sound caught their attention. It was coming from behind one of the trees. The noise was barely there, and honestly, if anyone else had been in the park, they probably wouldn't have even noticed it. The sound came again, just a little clearer this time. Ivan, who often spent his free time helping out at local shelters, immediately picked up on it. It was a dog. But what on earth was a dog doing out here, in this weather? They both exchanged a look. Was it lost? Had something happened to its owner? The sound came once more, and this time Ivan and Alexei quietly moved toward the tree, trying not to scare whatever was there. As they got closer, they saw a tiny shape curled up in a tight little ball. It was shaking non-stop, and snow had already piled up on its fur. The dog must have been there for a while. Even as they approached, it didn't react. No bark, no movement, just silence. It was like it had already given up. They slowly circled around until they were right in front of it. Still no reaction. Alexei crouched down and gently lifted the dog's head. What he saw was heartbreaking. Its eyes were shut tight, and there was no sign it was even aware they were there. It wasn't responding to anything, and its little body felt stiff from the cold. Ivan bent down to help, trying to see if it would move at all, but there was nothing. The poor thing was skin and bones, probably a stray that had been out in the freezing weather for days. That's when they spotted something else. Next to the dog, there was another small shape, curled up tight and pressed against its body. It had its face buried in the dog's fur, like it had been trying to stay warm. Alexei leaned in to get a better look, and as soon as he turned the figure over, both of them cried out in shock. "Hey, are you okay?" Alexei asked quickly, placing a hand on what they now realized was a little girl. But she didn't answer. She wasn't moving at all. Without wasting a second, Alexei took off his scarf and wrapped it around her, then gently picked her up. Ivan scooped the dog into his arms, too. It was still limp, but he wasn't letting it go. The girl felt ice cold, and she wasn't waking up. She looked like she might be around 10 years old, if that. Both men stood there for a moment, trying to think, but there was no time to hesitate. They knew they had to act fast. Alexei pulled out his phone and called for an ambulance, while Ivan quickly dialed every vet he knew. It was the holiday season, so most places were closed, but they had to try. Within about half an hour, the ambulance arrived. Alexei jumped in with the little girl, holding her close and whispering for her to hang on. Ivan kept trying numbers until he finally got through to a small nonprofit animal rescue he'd heard about. Thankfully, someone picked up. After Ivan explained what was going on and shared their location, they thanked him for helping and asked if he could bring the dog in right away. When Ivan reached the shelter, a vet was already waiting. After a quick check, they confirmed the dog had a few minor injuries, but it would survive, even after everything it had been through. Meanwhile, Alexei had arrived at the hospital with the girl, and the medical team rushed her in immediately. She had on a jacket, gloves, and boots, but they weren't enough. The cold had taken a toll. Her whole body was stiff, and she didn't respond to touch or sound. Her face had gone pale. The doctors found that her body temperature had dropped to around 25 degrees Celsius, dangerously low, and her heart was barely beating. They got to work fast, wrapping her in heated blankets and connecting her to a respirator. Luckily, her organs, like her kidneys, lungs, and liver, were still working. They used special machines to help keep her blood flowing and warm up her core. The nurses removed her icy clothes and gently dressed her in warm, dry ones, hoping it wasn't too late. Ivan eventually met up with Alexei at the hospital, and the two of them stayed as long as they could, hoping for updates. But after a while, one of the nurses gently asked them to go home. Since the girl was a minor, the hospital wasn't allowed to share too many details unless her parents were there. All the doctor could tell them was that she was stable now. She still had a long road ahead of her, but she was going to make it. And honestly, it was only because of that brave dog who'd stayed curled up next to her through the storm, keeping her warm. Hearing that news brought a huge sense of relief. Alexei and Ivan felt the tension in their bodies finally ease. They couldn't stop thinking about how long she'd been out there, or how she even ended up in the middle of that snowy field. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All they wanted was for her to get better. They quietly headed home, hoping that tomorrow would bring even better news. The next morning, they went straight to the local police station. They described the little girl, the place where they had found her, and which hospital she had been taken to. They just wanted to know if someone had reported her missing. Fortunately, the officer they spoke with confirmed that a missing persons report had come in the day before. Her family had been searching for her non-stop and had just been notified a few minutes ago. They were already on their way to the hospital. Alexei and Ivan decided to head back to the hospital too. One of the doctors had stayed overnight to monitor the girl's condition closely. It turned out she'd had a rough night. She'd suffered a few seizures caused by the extreme hypothermia, and it had taken everything the team had to stabilize her. But by the time morning rolled around, the worst seemed to be behind her. Her body temperature was holding steady now. She hadn't woken up yet, but the doctors were hopeful that she'd be able to speak, and maybe even go home, later that day. Before heading to the girls' room, a doctor pulled them aside with something important to say. As a thank you for finding her, the hospital was going to allow Alexei and Ivan a quick visit. After that, they'd need the parents' permission to see her again. The two of them nodded, grateful for the chance to check in one last time. When they walked into her room, they weren't expecting what they saw. The girl was already awake. She looked disoriented, her eyes darting around the room as if trying to piece together what had happened. She was still very weak, but even in that state, she was trying to push herself up, struggling to get off the bed. As soon as the nurse saw the girl trying to move, she quickly called in the doctor. Then she turned to Alexei and Ivan and kindly asked them to step out of the room. While they waited in the hallway, hoping to hear more, they saw someone rush through the hospital entrance. "Where's Vika? Where is my daughter?" a woman cried out, her voice full of panic. She looked completely overwhelmed, and even the person with her was struggling to calm her down. A nurse gently guided her away, and she disappeared around the corner. When the nurse came back, Ivan walked over to ask what had just happened. That woman, the nurse explained, was the girl's mother. She had just gotten the news about her daughter and had come straight to the hospital. The moment Vika saw her mom's familiar face among the crowd, she finally began to settle down. She was now in good hands and receiving more care from the medical team. Now that someone was there to stay with her, Alexei and Ivan felt it was time to go. They had done everything they could. The nurse asked them to leave a phone number just in case, and the two of them quietly made their way back home. 2 days later, they got a call they weren't expecting. It was Vika's mother. She wanted to meet in person and thank them for saving her daughter's life. They agreed to meet at a cafe near the park, the same area where this whole story had started. When they arrived, they were surprised to see that it wasn't just the mother waiting for them. Vika was there too. She looked like a completely different kid from the one they'd found in the snow. Her cheeks had color again, and her eyes were bright. Her mom smiled and welcomed them with a warm hug, immediately thanking them for what they had done. She introduced herself as Tatiana and then explained what had happened. Vika had gotten lost on her way home from school. It wasn't far, and usually she walked home by herself since the area was safe. But that day, a sudden blizzard rolled in, and the snow piled up fast, almost 2 feet deep. Drifts were so high they blocked the lower floors of buildings. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Vika could barely see a few steps ahead. Scared and unsure of what to do, she tried to find shelter, but the storm only pushed her farther from home. Her hands and feet started to go numb, and walking became harder with each step. Eventually, she collapsed. The last thing she remembered before waking up in the hospital was the freezing cold and a dog curled up beside her. Tatiana had searched the entire neighborhood, but no one had seen anything, and the storm had knocked out most of the street cams. For a whole day, they had no idea where she was. She had plenty of questions for Alexei and Ivan. They told her exactly where they'd found Vika and how the dog had stayed with her the entire time. It was clear. The dog had saved her life. If it hadn't been there to keep her warm, things could have ended much worse. They also gave her an update about the dog. It had recovered and was still at the vet's care, waiting to be placed in a good home. The vet had shared the story with the animal shelter, who then posted it online. After that, adoption requests came flooding in. They hadn't found any clue about where the dog came from, but based on how well trained it was, it seemed likely it had once belonged to someone. Sadly, it had probably been abandoned. The shelter was being extra cautious this time. They wanted to make sure that whoever adopted the dog would truly care for it. They'd narrowed it down to 2 great families and were getting ready to choose. But Tatiana had another idea. To her, there was no question. This dog had saved her daughter. Aside from Alexei and Ivan, there was no one she felt more grateful to. Vika had told her how the dog had stayed close, how it made her feel less alone and less afraid. She had asked about the dog after waking up and wanted to see it again if she could. Tatiana understood the shelter's process, but deep down, none of them liked the idea of the dog possibly ending up in another unfamiliar home, where it might not be treated the way it deserved. So, they made a decision. They were going to adopt the dog themselves. It would be their first pet, but honestly, there couldn't be a more perfect one. What Vika and her mom both knew for sure was that they already loved this dog, and they were ready to do whatever it took to give it the life it deserved. Ivan gave them the shelter's contact info, and they reached out right away. When the shelter heard who was calling, they were over the moon. The staff happily agreed to move forward with the adoption. It took a few weeks to wrap up the process, and during that time, the shelter gave Vika's family plenty of guidance. Since this would be their first dog, they wanted to make sure everything went smoothly. They learned how to take care of him properly and what his habits had been while staying at the shelter. But the most heartwarming moment came when they finally came to pick him up. As soon as the dog saw Vika, something clicked. He recognized her. The way he perked up and leaned into her touch said it all. Vika couldn't stop smiling as he nuzzled into her, and it made the whole experience even more special. Her mom bent down beside them and gently patted his head. "Thank you," she whispered to the dog, her voice soft but full of emotion. "Thank you for saving my daughter." When they got home, the dog was shown the cozy little corner that had been set up just for him. Vika's mom had gone all out. New toys, a comfy bed, and even a few of his favorite treats from the shelter. They were doing everything they could to make sure he felt safe and loved. Vika gave him a name, Mutig. It means brave, and nothing could have fit better. Even though they weren't sure how things would go at first, Mutig fit right in. His sweet personality started to shine more every day. Vika and her mom took him on regular walks through the park, and before long, he made a new friend there, another dog who loved to play just as much as he did. Having Mutig in their lives felt like a gift they never expected, and every time they looked at him, they were reminded of the snowy day that brought them all together. What about you? Would you have stopped for a dog that looked like it wasn't breathing? What would you have done if you found a little girl curled up beside it? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.